It is not on. Now it is. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Today is October the 19th. We're calling to order the special meeting of the Governing Board regarding the Facilities Master Plan Workshop. Our first item of business is a Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Haxton would be so kind as to lead us. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. And Josh said that he would be running a couple of minutes late, and I told him that we wouldn't actually get started into too much of the plan until he has an opportunity to get here. Are there any requests for changes to our agenda, order of the agenda, or anything else? No. Since we are waiting for Josh, maybe we could take out of order our public comments. I know we have Mr. Haxton wishing to make a public comment. My thinking on that is that if we take your public comment first, we could always take more comments later, but it might be useful because then our speakers and our presenters tonight could attempt to address your comments. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Haxton, I think that might just be more efficient tonight.
I'm sorry that the drop off to improve the safety for the students has been put off to basically a future bond. I think that safety is number one, and you ought to relook at that. PCY, I don't have a problem with dropping the new north building. I don't think it really affects much. But I don't think not working on the library now makes sense. I mean, during the process of developing the PCY plan, what they said is the library is difficult because it's in the center of campus, and you can't get to it, and so it's now or never. And you are convinced to take out the permanent building next to it. So now you have space to work on it, and then you're not working on the library. And, you know, unless it's changed in the last 8 or whatever years since I've had a child there, it's the worst building on the whole campus. And I think you should be doing something now and not wait for the next bond. And I appreciate $3 million for a parking lot is a lot at PCY, but you know, you've imposed on the local residents for whatever it is, 60, 70 years. And I think you ought to do something about that. At LCE, I would like to hear tonight clarification about where this new building would be, because the last time they said it would not be next to La Cañada Boulevard, which was the original facilities master plan. So I'm kind of confused where that would be. I'm not clear what the $1.5 million of parking lot improvements are that they're talking about. And I'm wondering why, if it's under consideration, doing sort of using the parking lot and the house that was bought to build kind of a 2-story, the bottom story being parking and the top story being classroom space, or, you know, useful space. At the high school, I'm curious about what size bleachers, how many would be able to sit there for $2 million, what the improvements to the softball and baseball fields are for $1.9 million, what the shop and the tech building would be for $6.8 million. And I would just like to point out that the shop building, or the shop, was a wood shop, and the last time there was a wood shop teacher was school year 2010, 2011, when my oldest son was an 11th grader, and then he retired. And a few years before that, they had fully outfitted the place. There was a new air system to get the sawdust and all that kind of stuff, and now it's kind of all gone. So I'm not sure where that's going. Curious about the million to improve the north gym, $5.4 million to improve the south gym. What this $6.2 million field house is, I'd like to just point out that the field house at the football field is actually the Gladiators. That it started as a Gladiators, and it has their football equipment in it, and the district just added on to the bathrooms. I'm curious about the improvement or the bleachers and field house for the softball field, because those are both pretty new. So what is it that needs to be done? And finally, where this parking structure for 7.5 million, or this is just where that would be, or is this just a conceptual thing where there's no actual plan? And finally, on the fencing that's for the high school, that's listed as a basically future bond. I think that should be moved up to the current bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haxton. I think those are all excellent questions. I made a list of them, so hopefully we can address all of them as we go through each project and try and answer them. If not, we'll give you another opportunity for public comment to make sure we address those things. I think they're all good, legitimate questions. With that, let's go ahead and move then into our actual agenda item number 3, Facilities Master Plan presentation on LCHS and LCUSD prioritization. Where do we start? Melissa or Wendy?
Thanks. So I'll start for us. So what we wanted to do to kick this off is that the bond passed quite a while ago, and we have accomplished a great deal. And we've accomplished a great deal in a fairly difficult time frame. We've had COVID, we've had the pandemic and all of its ramifications. We've seen supply chain issues and labor shortages, and just wanted to take a step back and remind the public and just help the board just take a minute to refresh. And so without further ado, let's go to the slideshow. So here we have our new building at Palmcrest with 20 new classrooms. There's very little construction left to be done. Pretty much everyone has moved in and feels very comfortable. And as you can see, just a beautiful night view of our gorgeous two-story buildings. A view from inside a classroom at PCR, new furniture, excellent design with regard to technology. We have our parents here at Back to School Night, so just a really incredible view and something to celebrate, just having a thoroughly modern classroom as a representative sample of our the inner workings of our 2 new story buildings. Ribbon cutting, so a little bit of a shout out to just taking a minute to celebrate. PCR's new main electrical switchgear was also accomplished, and so we're really paying attention to all of the infrastructure and utility upgrades as we progress with this new construction at each of the sites. Jamie?
You will not see a picture of the sewer, but I think it's important that we note that was also accomplished during this time period, and everybody around Palmcrest is grateful.
You go on to LCE, and this work was done a while ago, but the playground improvements really allowing for that space to be optimally utilized. Also, as a part of our initial bond work, you had the kindergarten playground at LCE, and there's another photo of our LCA playground improvements. But the teachers have been really thoroughly happy with the kindergarten playground, and it really has made the outdoor space so much more functional and good for kids. Here's the new lunch shelter at PCY. We hold all kinds of meetings out there. I know that the PTA meetings are sometimes held out there, but it's a really functional space, and it really complements the exterior of the campus. The perimeter fencing at all 3 schools, but we'll start with PCY. And you can see the attention to detail that the governing board paid on, making sure that we kept the park-like setting at each of our elementary schools, but provided for the safety and security on our campuses. And here's another shot of the PCY perimeter fencing. At LCE, the front gates, we have good reminders to keep gates closed, but they really function well and are a testament to our commitment to campus safety and security. Here at Palm Crest, the opening gates, and you have some unity amongst the design at all three campuses. Going on to high school, it's a little bit more of a challenge to close up such a porous campus, but we began the work on perimeter fencing and are really making the campus less porous and trying to work through the design so that it complements the ongoing work with the decking and the railing and helps with some wayfinding. And here at the back, the 7-8 lot, the perimeter fencing back by our junior high school. Perimeter fencing along Oak Grove, and we see the band room to the right. And so really key areas of the campus have been closed up, and we can continue to make progress towards, I don't think it'll ever be a single point of entrance, but much more targeted entry points. Here's the band room, a photo of the band room improvements that were also part of our initial bond work here. And then, some of the projects that are a little less attractive or, we can forget about easily because we don't see them. But if you remember, the rain and all of that used to flood the band room. And so really taking care of the property and making sure that, again, we're paying attention to form and function with all of our bond work. LCHS cafeteria redesign completed. Still working on getting sort of the maximum use out of that. Much better this year after as many of our COVID protocols have gone away or subsided, but it's a beautiful space and much more functional for the kids. Softball field improvements, you see here, also part of our initial bond work. And so just a quick reminder and a recap of all the work that's been done. And I wanted to sort of remember to set the stage. This is, I think, the third meeting, maybe fourth, of our work on this reprioritization process. We've gone through and looked at all of the completed projects, all of the projects that are currently, in process, the projects that are identified, and we've begun either conceptual design or schematic design, so they're on the docket. And then where we really have to look at is the projects that were slated for this bond and what has surfaced as new priorities, what are the competing priorities, and really have the board make some strategic decisions about what stays on the list and maybe what gets deferred for potential a new bond down the road. But there's a lot of good discussion that we want to have tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our program manager from Linnet Corporation, who's been really instrumental in making sure that our projects are done well, that we are competitive, that they are, like I said before, maximizing form and function so that they're aesthetically pleasing, but really functional for the purposes that our students need. And so, Harold, thank you for leading us in this process and for all the work that you've done throughout the past, it's hard to imagine 5 years, but I think it was just a really good recap to see all of the great work that you've helped us to see come to fruition. So, Harold, we would like to finish tonight, but we can also come back. And we just really want this to be a robust discussion because these decisions, especially as we go to our third issuance this week, it's really important that we have a firm sense of what your priorities are and what will be slated for the life of this bond. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you.
Harold, before you get started, let's just kind of talk for a moment about the format of tonight. I think it might work best if we kind of do it in a workshop sort of format. That is, to talk about each project and to talk about any questions that we have on that particular project as we're talking about it. So if you're comfortable with that, instead of like we often will hold our questions to the end and just have a series of questions, but that may feel a little disjointed tonight.
Okay.
So I think it may just be, I know Josie, I see some questions. I've got questions. We have questions from Mr. Haxton. So that if we kind of maybe approach it as like a workshop kind of thing, and sort of as we talk about each project, we talk about questions on that particular project. I think we could use it as sort of an information gathering as our focus tonight. Whether we get to the ultimate reprioritization or not, we can at least spend some time doing information gathering.
Yeah,
Is that
but I
okay?
do have a question, though. We do have a couple of items that run across the whole district.
Right.
So do we want to do those separately or just inclusive with every?
I think
Cool.
probably when we start talking about, when Harold starts talking about it, I think it might be good to, just sort of pause for a second and talk about that item and answer any questions you have, like wherever it fits in most appropriately.
Okay.
Thank you, Harold.
Okay, we have sent to you this PowerPoint presentation, and the intent of this presentation was to summarize all of the previous discussion we had. So essentially, we took the presentations that we did on LCE, PCR, and PCY, and as well as the high school, and combined them into this document. So we're not going to go through the presentation for the PowerPoint presentation, but instead we'll primarily focus on the staff recommendations for project priorities and explain how we got there. So with you've seen this slide before. This is really as we put together the facility master plan or updated the facility master plan, these were the objectives that we pursued. We were to look at the district long-term goals as it pertains to facilities needs. We look to identify facilities needs at each of the schools, and during that time, we looked at specifically at those areas that were not previously identified in the old facility master plan. This was the master plan that was put together in 2017. We, as you know, we've started this bond program. We've completed a series of projects. We have some more projects to do. So we have also spent some of the money. So we have funding remaining. And as we look at some of the projects that have become apparent to us that these needs may need to be reviewed by the boards, and the board consider whether or not those needs supersedes other projects that were previously identified to be done under Measure LCF, whether the board would look to do those projects now, given the situation of some of these projects. Deferring them to the future may create problem. So for that reason, we kind of take a look at as we do the update to see if those projects should be elevated to a higher priority. So hence, after reviewing those projects, we look at how do we prioritize those projects for the remaining funding that we have, and then identify any funding gaps that we may have. The last meeting, I presented this slide, and the intent was, as we prioritize the projects, what are the things that we want to consider as project priorities? And what we did in this slide, the change that we made to this slide is to sort of identify a reason code so that every project can be assigned that code, so you could correlate the project to the considerations that we use to bring that project up to the level of priority. Yeah, so the code essentially, these are arbitrary, letters, but primarily, so for projects that satisfy, say, continuing the Measure LCF program goals for classroom improvement, when you look at the priority list, we put LC as the priority list. So that means that project fall under this criteria. And then when you look at the HVAC projects, due to the phasing of R22 and also aging of the equipment, we just assign a priority H for HVAC. Hence, it fall under that criteria. So the code is really, it's just an arbitrary number, but it's really the reasons behind it that that really satisfy the conditions that we're trying to look.
Yeah, because I think part of what we wanted to get at last time was degree of critical and feasible. So there's a dimension here I'd like to discuss tonight too, is if all things look pretty important, how do we tease out? Remember we said, is it a 1 through a 10? Is it an 8? Is it a 7? So at some point, that's where I thought maybe CP was super critical. I didn't know the naming convention here, but at some point today, throughout this workshop, this information gathering, talk about these projects so we really get a handle on how urgent some of these are and the implications if we don't do something sooner.
So as we talk about each project in particular, and I'll try to summarize why that particular project fall in that category and why that project would be, say, an urgent project. So I've had the, I guess, the fortunate situation where I've gotten to know the district's facilities quite well in the last 4.5, 5 years. As I do these projects, I learn more. Reviewing the facility master plan, and then you executing that facility master plan, you start to see the gaps that were not identified previously, and we try to cover those gaps. So for each of the sites where it made sense to include those projects or those consideration in that project that we are engaging, we did that. And so the consequence of that, some of those projects at the facility master plan back in 2017, those projects were not fully scoped out. So as we do the project, the scope ended up growing because some of those issues had to be done at the time.
Another thing to note is I think it's important to compare our last facility master plan, prioritization, and it was done with LPA, and LPA did a great job, but they came in and they didn't have that working knowledge of our facilities. And so what we were prioritizing sometimes was sort of want to have versus need to have, or, is essential to have. And so now what Harold will do is when we go through these, he, along with, the cabinet, can give you some narrative about why we're recommending something be reprioritized, because as he's learned our facility, certain things have come to light, and there's some of the more, less glamorous things, some of the things that are more infrastructure based, but there really are, we're seeing things either at end of life or that, are essential to the functioning of day-to-day operations. And those items, might not have surfaced with LPA, but when we're doing a very practical, knowledgeable reprioritization, they've come to, fruition as high priorities.
And another quick question. I know, Harold, you mentioned staff recommendations. Are we talking staff at each site or just cabinet at this point?
Pretty much. The principals will weigh in occasionally, but I think this is a higher level recommendation. This is, the result of our program manager meetings that occur every other week, cabinet meetings, Melissa, Harold, and I meeting. So it's a combination of really district staff, but we are knowledgeable and connected with the interests of the principals as they guide their school sites.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the things that we did try to do here is, because the facility master plan that was done in 2017, you went through a very extensive process where, you had committees and the sites were very engaged in that process. The educational program overall has not changed. It was still a K-6 district, right? The enrollment is relatively stable. So there's really no major change. We do have things like all-day kindergarten to consider and pre-K programs, but those can be accommodated. But overall, what we look to do is to preserve the original facility master plan and continuing that process and essentially tweak it so that we account for those other needs that were not identified in the facility master plan. Continuing, so we have central plant equipment at the high school, and that area was not discussed in the original facility master plan. And as we look at the equipment is aging and would need to be replaced at some point. We have utility infrastructure, which is probably the area where there's probably the biggest risk because those lines are underground. Some of them are over 50 years old. The materials used back then, not as good as materials today. So we do have a lot of leaks in some of the water lines, especially the heating and cooling lines at that campus. We also in an area that we think is very important is the seismic mitigation for the district. Fortunately for the elementary school, we were able to accommodate some of the seismic upgrade as part of the renovation project. So that is one of the areas where we see a growth in scope of the project, because that area was not specifically identified as part of the original facility master plan. But the level of renovation that we're doing at those sites essentially either triggered for us to do the seismic upgrade, or we see that we've identified some areas that there may be some deficiencies that it makes sense to do that at this time. So essentially we do some voluntary upgrade at the elementary school site. And then the last item on this list is the safety improvements. For the elementary, essentially at each of the school sites, we're doing facilities and safety improvement. And for the elementary school, we essentially absorb those safety improvements within the overall renovation program. The high school, we have to identify them specifically since we don't necessarily have a whole campus or classroom improvement program at the high school.
You know, Harold, before you move on, I have questions about both HVAC and seismic. I don't know, do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to come back to it as part of the specific? Kind of like what Kaiser was saying, they kind of cover the entire district. Do you want to talk about them now?
I think specific based on what you were saying, it'll be much more, especially in light of the fact that with some of our projects, we've already included seismic upgrades, et cetera. So.
Okay. Yeah, then we'll come back to, I just have to say, sort of for the record, and just to be clear and anyone watching, we're not talking about any sort of safety issues in terms of seismic. The buildings are strong, the kids are well protected. It's not that, it's that if there's a major earthquake, then the buildings themselves may suffer damage. They will survive and the kids will be fine, but that it may cost more to repair them if we don't do something ahead of time.
That's correct.
I hate to keep re-saying that. It sounds like a broken record, but I don't want anyone to come away with the wrong message.
That's the overall statement right there. Thanks, Jan.
So right now, having looked at what we considered as for project priorities, we're going to go to the list of projects, and we could go project by project, talk about the why this project in particular, where it falls in the spectrum of priorities. And, in terms of priorities, I can't tell you this one is a 10, this one is a 8, this one is a 9, but I could tell you this one, you should be looking at it, right? So
That's a 10. That's fine.
okay. You know, I think all of these projects, you know, we met, the staff met several times, and we look at every project and kind of said, we think this one should go on the list. Well, this one, yes, I think we could probably defer that to a future date. So we actually discussed each one of those and came up with, we think we have a fixed sum of money to use. And based on that, you had to try to pick the ones that represent I would say, the highest level of needs so that you can fully continue your operations for the next 10 years.
Can I ask, is this, just to understand process, is this a site blind process, or was there an attempt to create parity across the sites?
I think that we were definitely trying to create parity, especially amongst the elementary. And then so many of the needs at the high school are sort of essential, must do. And so there was also some parity trying to be built between elementary and secondary. So we had a lens for that. And then there were certain priorities such as surface, because we won't be able to run the facility without those.
And one other question just about general process, before we dive into the specifics. I noticed that there is of the $35.5 million to be allocated, there's $9 million in contingency, which feels pretty significant to me. Is that a normal amount, or is that an increased amount because of the climate that we're in, or how did that number come up?
I would say it's a normal amount, only because some of these projects, we haven't fully defined the scope of those projects yet. And so we not only have to account for what the scope of the project would be, we also have to account for cost growth, escalation. It doesn't mean you can't say, you know what, these projects didn't quite make it to the list. So we could have some projects that we could identify as, yeah, the priorities, but they're below the funding line. So if money should remain available, then you could go down the list and pick some of those projects. That's the way I would recommend you do it, because you don't want to fully commit all of the money that we have remaining, because there's still unknowns.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of, we know the market or the environment we're in for construction. We know that, escalation dollars, the escalation percentages are higher now than we were planning for in 2017. We also know, based on what we've recognized in the existing projects, that there will be some surprises. We also know that we'll identify some future unknowns that will become high priorities. And so it was a combination of really trying to be prudent and, fiscally responsible, and leaving enough for all of those contingencies.
Yeah, I'd like to make that statement that this last amount is really critical, right? And so if we've been really good about, when we commit, they're all going, and we get far down, and that's a testament to your work. When you've been flighting a lot concurrently. And the danger here now is, if we flight a lot concurrently, all of a sudden you could have several overruns, and we're in trouble on several fronts. So I'd almost be, when you say normal contingency, I would lean toward even more conservative contingencies. I've heard people in the community talk about some of the stories of past bonds where they've been everybody's been in a lot of trouble in terms of, oh my gosh, we're overrun, how are we going to solve it? And I really don't want to be in that position later on. So I think conservative contingencies, but then have laser focus on, whatever gate we clear, we can start to open up some of those below the line ones and be ready to go. But just fiscally conservative on this is going to be so important in this wild escalation of cost timeframe that I don't think is going away anytime soon.
Okay, this first list, these are the list of projects that we've already completed. And you did get a pictorial representation of those projects just earlier. But this one, the pictures that you saw, some of those projects could not be represented by pictures. but in essence, this is where we spent the first $40 million of the bond program. So we've completed projects at PCR. PCR is the first elementary school that undergo renovation. We pretty much completed with the new 2-story buildings. We have perimeter fencing that we've installed. We did some roofing work that's shown on, let's see, I think we need to, okay, there you go. We one area, site utilities improvement, that you can't really represent that in pictures, but there's a lot of underground utilities that really were very old that we replaced. The site was previously on septic tank. We put in a new sewer line. And then now we're moving on to PCY with the major renovation project. That one is not represented on the completed project, but at PCY, these are the projects we've done so far. We have perimeter fencing. We did do landscaping work. We did some safety and security improvement at that site and roof replacement, and then the lunch shelter replacement. Any questions so far? And then at LCE, we did the new perimeter fencing, playground improvement, and then more recently, you purchased the house that is next to the school. And the thought is that area would allow the district to maybe expand that site. We think it might lend itself to be a parking lot because we don't have much at LCE. I know there was a question as to what is that $1.7 million for parking lot. And in my thought, I think that area would be the likely area where you could expand the existing parking lot. At LCHS, these are the projects that we've already completed. Cafeteria, the MPR improvement. We didn't do any work in the kitchen, but the eating area, that's the improvement that we did there. The band room, we did that work in conjunction with the drainage improvement. We did significant roof repair and replacement, primarily on building 600 and building A. And the field, this is the football field. We did do a bit of drainage repair on that field. And then a major safety improvement we did at that site is the lockdown and access control, where we introduce electronic locks, and we're looking to continue that type of improvement at all of the elementary schools. The fencing, this is just a portion of the site that was fenced. And then we did the softball field. That project, we did receive some contribution from the softball association, parent community, parent group. And the Prop 39 lighting, that amount, the $24,000, really does not necessarily, that doesn't quite represent the scope of the project at the high school. That amount essentially is really what the amount that was contributed, I believe, by the district for that site. And then the technology.
Harold, before you leave it, maybe we should just address the question about the softball field, because I'm not sure we're going to come back to it as to what was done. It's my understanding what was done there is that the netting that goes up around the back of the softball area was bending forward and looked like it was going to fall over. I don't know if it actually was likely to fall, but that was the concern, that it was old and kind of leaning forward and becoming a safety hazard. So as I understand it, that was addressed as well as the ADA issues, that there was no ADA access or anywhere on the softball field. Were there any other issues addressed at that time?
There was a bit of a drainage issue in that area that we also addressed as part of that project. The additional work that remains is the existing bleachers that would need to be looked at in the future. The existing building, I know there was a comment that that building is new. It's a portable building, and at some point it will meet its life expectancy, and you may need to look at replacing that. The improvement that we did was primarily on the varsity side, and we didn't do anything on the JV side. So there's still work remaining in that area to be done.
What bleachers, when you talk about bleacher improvements, what,
This is
they're just the standalone aluminum bleachers now, right?
Yeah.
Are they not holding up?
These, yes, they are standalone bleachers, but they're over 5 rises, and they're supposed to be built with permit. And those would need to be replaced at some point.
Thank you.
So the next sheet is really the list of projects that the board has already committed to do. And some of those projects, the planning, we are in advanced stages of planning for those projects, especially at PCY and at PCR. So we would be continuing that planning effort. So on that list, we have started the classroom at PCR, the renovation of the existing classroom buildings. We have ADA barrier removal, which we're calling ADA barrier removal phase 2, additional accessibility work that we have to do at that site in order to be able to get certification for the projects. And we have the playground, the play field. We used the play field last year for NOM housing. We removed all the NOM housing. We've done some temporary work to restore the play field, and we're looking to go back and further improve the play field. This project also would include replacing the asphalt. So we see the asphalt, it's fairly old, and you see a lot of cracks on the asphalt, so it needs to be resurfaced. We have some playground equipment that need to also be replaced, especially the safety surfacing. The parking lot, this is really more of an interim measure. Once we've done with all the renovation work at the site, we would return the parking lot. This is the upper parking lot where the old district office used to be. We want to return that to use by the school, and we would do some safety improvement on that lot so it could be used. And then the last project there is really some of the planning work that we've done related to the overall parking lot design.
When I was looking through the list earlier, I was trying to understand some of these things, like why is a playground renovation so expensive? It seems like that's a lot. What do we have to do? Is that relocating utilities? What's involved in that? Why is it make it so high?
Everything we do in school is expensive. We have to pay prevailing wages on any public works projects that exceed $1,000, believe it or not. And prevailing wages higher than what you would pay on the commercial side. That's one. The other part is things are just expensive right now. The scope of that project would involve replacing the existing asphalt. We also would be replacing the rubberized surfacing that's underneath the play equipment. That is probably one of the most expensive single piece item. I think we estimated that just the surfacing is close to $100,000 for the play equipment. We also would want to extend the field. That's one of the items that the district has agreed to do as part of the, helping the community and sharing the field with the community. It's not a significant part of the project, but since we are replacing the asphalt, it just lend itself to be done at that time.
On that one, that might be something we might want to seek reimbursement from the city. I don't know if we've pursued that in terms of whatever cost there is of expanding that field.
Yes, we haven't sought reimbursement, but we've talked about sort of the integration of multiple projects across multiple sites and what would be district responsibility, what potentially the city contributions could be, and then what user group contributions could also be.
Let's look at LCE. For the projects that we continuing at LCE, we have some safety and security improvement work. We haven't yet defined the scope of that work, but we essentially set aside some funding for safety, security improvement down the road, although the scope hasn't yet been defined. And then the technology upgrade at LCE. And one of the reasons for what we're doing with the technology upgrade, we're doing the technology upgrade in conjunction with the renovation project, because LCE is a little bit further out. The district may choose to do some of the technology improvement upfront. So it's really a question on timing. And
Can I ask a couple questions here? So the technology upgrade that we have set aside $700,000+ for is not currently being utilized, but the money is being saved for potentially whatever we decide to do.
yes.
Will some of those funds be utilized currently or as we need, as we move forward?
Hi. One of the things we're thinking about is the Palmcrest teachers have enjoyed the new projector that is mounted on the ceiling and they're not walking over cords in their rooms, and LCE teachers have requested that be something we do sooner than later. And also a lot of teachers have enjoyed the voice amplification that they started using during distance learning and hybrid teaching. And it's built in now into the classrooms at Palmcrest. And it's really lovely that they just put on a mic, push a button, and all of their kids have really clear access to their teacher's voice. So we were looking at some of those things, probably pushing them up ahead a little bit earlier.
Would that then impact the modernization that we could potentially be doing? Or is that going to cost double the work and double the cost as we go down the road?
Well, one of the things we'd look at is at Palmcrest, we ran entirely new copper cables. So we would use existing ones and we might have to just run one new cable to each room, or we could even kind of steal one out of the wall and run it up to the projector. So we would try not to do anything that we would just be ripping out later.
Okay, I do recall all of the lines in the classroom
Yes.
and the tape on top of
Yes.
each line.
And the rugs.
And the rugs and the discussion of the boards. But then the safety and security improvements, are we talking about the fencing on the side and on the back, or what?
It could be paving, it could be additional, locking mechanism, and some part of the campus.
Okay.
We just have not yet defined specifically what the scope of that project.
Harold, is there a reason why there's such a big discrepancy between the technology, or Jamie, technology upgrade between PCY and LCE?
So I some of this estimate came from the original facility master plan, and we just carried it to today. And it may represent the overall scope of that project, or it may not. But we essentially set aside a pot of money that we would do security and not security, but technology improvement. And we, as part of the modernization, we work closely with Jamie to identify what specific technology improvement we would implement.
And a little bit of it is if you look at PCY, you're talking about new classroom buildings and existing classroom modernization. And so the additional technology upgrade is lower because some of those upgrades are included in the new buildings and in the modernization. Whereas LCE, I mean, part of it, the challenge of this process is that you need to sort of have the next 3 pages of docs in front of you, because for LCE, we've committed to technology upgrade, but we're also recommending that we do the classroom modernization, which will pick up some additional technology upgrades. It will also involve interim housing and will also involve seismic upgrades. So that puts you at about that 9.8, for LCE, it's around $9 million. Now, if the board wanted to go to the 3rd page of unfunded facilities, staff is making the recommendation that we do the new building, we defer the new building at LCE until after we've modernized and potentially phase that into a future bond. But if you look at the new classroom renovation, that's hitting at about the $11.6 million mark. So if the board valued the new classroom building over the modernization and seismic upgrades and interim housing, those could be swapped. But we feel like if we modernize the existing classrooms, upgraded the technology, upgraded the seismic, safety and all of that, that would be the first priority. And then we could assess long-term needs that weren't met through existing modernization, and then look towards the next phase being a new building at LCE, because we don't know size and scope of what that new project might be. And we'll have a better sense of it once we move through the modernization of the existing classrooms. So, and Jamie, I'm thinking explain more, but so many of these buckets are interconnected. And so where we might be funding some upgrades through new buildings or modernization, a standalone technology item might represent the differential at another site.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And then adding to that, sometimes we're looking at the clock bell PA system. And so that can either fall under modernization, or that could be isolated out under technology, or could even fall under safety and security. So it's a little bit fluid in some of how those budget pieces work. And then we also have security cameras, which we've done. And some of that fell under new building because it was attached to the new building, but then there was a separate item for the wires we ran. So there's a lot of interconnectivity there. And it's just the staging, exactly how Wendy spoke about it.
So when I listen to this, though, I think of it in the 3 buckets: done work, paid for. Okay. Then we talked about that the middle bucket was more of it's already underway, not finished, or in advanced planning. The next bucket was where uncommitted funds and available funds could be reallocated. When I hear some of the conversation here, it seems like these still aren't truly in advanced planning stages or underway. So even some of this to me could be up for discussion. Can that be reallocated possibly? It just seems like it's committed, but I thought we were saying that it was advanced plan. It's either underway or in advanced planning. This seems like there's still a lot to.
The only thing there comes the parity issue, is that we have completed or committed funds at PCR and PCY, but we have committed to some extent, not with planning, not with dollars spent, but we have committed work at LCE, and we want to, prioritize some level of parity amongst the 3 elementary schools. So that is a bit of a misnomer in terms of your buckets, because we're saying that there are committed projects at LCE. We haven't gone into we haven't gone into conceptual design or schematic design on any work at LCE, but we know that we've made a commitment to have improvements, significant improvements at all 3 sites. And so that's why you see some committed work that isn't underway at LCE.
So some of this also, I wonder, is it a bookkeeping question? Because the one that I've flagged is the technology upgrade at PCY. So the technology upgrade at PCY, which is, over $500,000, there is no line item technology upgrade at Palmcrest because I'm assuming it was in the modernization and the new building. Well, PCY is going to undergo the same process, but yet there's also a bucket for technology upgrade at PCY. Now, I understand why there would be a bucket for technology upgrade at LCE, because there's very potentially not the same level of work being done. But at PCY, if we're modernizing every classroom and we're building all those new classrooms, what does that money do?
Okay, so when we started out with the budget for PCR, we had a separate line item for technology upgrade. It so happened that the way we implemented the technology upgrade at PCR, we kind of did it in conjunction with the renovation and in conjunction with the new two-story building. So that budget just kind of got absorbed into the new construction and into the modernization. So that's the reason why you don't see a separate project for technology upgrade.
So the assumption at PCY would be the same, basically, that it would go into the modernization ultimately.
Yes.
So, but it's still set aside here. Okay, that makes
Now,
sense.
there's still some equipment that the district purchase separately from the construction contract. Then we would essentially charge that to this line item called technology upgrade, or this project called technology upgrade. For instance, the switches, the district purchased those under a separate agreement.
So sorry, just to make sure we understand our task, for the purposes of this conversation, anything that is in committed projects, we should just not touch right now. That is, even if the bookkeeping is a little weird in this case, it is allocated already. And we should, as Joe's saying, is in the bucket number 2, and we should concentrate on bucket number 3, because we can't go back and start moving around bucket number 2.
Yeah, I mean, we would incur additional costs, and we would also impede our progress if we sort of veer from the committed projects list. I mean, I think we would have to have really strong reasons and motivation behind altering any of the projects here, because they're committed, they're in process, or, they're underway.
Yes.
And so I would recommend against that.
Well, I'm okay we're asking questions to understand. And as the overall framework to get through the meeting and to make progress, great. But if we get at the end and we need $250,000 and we have to make some choices, technically we could go back and really put pen to paper on some of that. So I understand. Let's move on. You guys have worked hard at this to kind of understand what's committed, parity, all the other components. But when we get to bucket 3, and that gets tough, then we know we might have to come back and make some further tougher choices. That's all. Because technically we haven't written checks. It's not been in design sitting over in the county, right? There's just, it's not where we are in some projects, right? Like the pool, you can't walk back the pool now, right?
Can't go back. Yes.
Yeah, right.
I think though, a good point though, along the lines of what Joe's talking about in terms of bucket 2, as you're calling it, that we might be interested in things that are in those projects where we could value engineer it. Like in a terrible example, but it's just one comes to mind. If the playground structure costs X because of the way we're doing the paving, is there another way to do it to save some money? I mean, I don't know that there is, because I'm sure you've looked at all those things, but I think that's kind of where Joe's going with it also, is like, is there something we can do even on those projects to save a little bit of more money so we can put them somewhere else?
How about we move forward and see where we're at, because we are at 7:45 and we haven't really discussed anything specific
Okay.
at this point.
With that,
Let's give it a try.
okay, we're gonna move to bucket number 3 then.
And just real quickly, I think you have to think of this as, a budgeting exercise at some level. And, when Melissa brings the budget, it's what we anticipate. And then when she brings the first interim, the second interim, the audited actuals and all of that, it starts to get more and more specific. So we are looking to value engineer anything that we can, but some of it is in such an early stage that hasn't, met its way. It hasn't made its way to the table yet.
With that, we'll move on to page 3. All right. So I can just go back to, so the amount available. So the last part of the page here shows you how much we have in terms of anticipated revenue and what we expect to get from other funding sources and what we'll have available, what we have remaining after, have completed projects and committed projects. So we have $35 million to prioritize.
And to be clear, the 35 includes more than just the bond itself, right?
The
Because
35 include other
because there's some other funding sources to what you just mentioned that are technically not the bond, but we've married together because it can be used against capital projects.
Yes. Here we have, this is the list of staff recommended projects for the remaining $35 million. We start off at LCE. We did a detailed inventory of all the HVAC equipment at each of the sites. And for LCE, we don't have as many as the high school, but we have equipment on the MPR as well as the admin. If we move forward with the renovation, then you'll have some funding to replace the equipment in the existing classroom. So that funding for replacing the equipment would be under the renovation project. If you were to move the renovation project and swap it with the new 2-story project, then we'll have to actually increase the scope of the HVAC upgrade.
And as I went through everything, so the overall 2 building is off the table right now. That is pulled out because that was a big line item, but you've replaced it with this lower item now because we're modernizing versus building from new, just to make sure, because that's the old building, the old proposed new building is not on there anymore.
It's not on there.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
It's on the, I guess, deferred project. So within the classroom building renovation list project that you see on this list, that also include replacing some of the replacing all of the classroom HVAC equipment. The part that say HVAC upgrade is only those equipment that would not have been replaced under modernization.
Would that include the admin building?
That would include the admin building, the MPR, and those 3 portables.
That the CEC uses?
CEC.
So the scope right now includes every single pod at LCE for modernization.
And when we say modernization, I think you have to really, I would recommend that we take you on a tour of PCR and you look at the level of modernization. I mean, those, essentially those classrooms are going to be brand new. And so we're talking about a total site renovation, but we have prioritized that over a new building, and we've really scaled back. I mean, I wouldn't recommend at this point a new 2-story building at LCE. But I think if you renovate all these classrooms, and then, we would be in a really strong place to determine what we would need for a new building. And then it would be at that next phase, at a future bond phase, that you would at LCE eliminate all of the existing portables. But unlike PCR and PCY, there are very few portables. I think, what are we talking, 5?
We've got the 3 for CEC and the 2 that are
and the
used on the
CEC
lower.
becomes a lower priority. So I think
Right.
there's a music classroom, an art classroom,
And the 2 classrooms that are right by the
the science
yard.
center.
Can I ask the budget line for classroom building modernization at LCE is lower than the modernization at PCY and Palmcrest? Is that just because of the number of classrooms we'd be
Yes.
modernizing?
Yeah, we've walked back from from identifying a need for a 2-story building.
Yeah, I just meant the modernization number is smaller than the modernization number at the other schools. Is that's because there's fewer classrooms?
Fewer classrooms, and also the classrooms there are newer. So the modernization would not require quite as much.
Yeah, and also for you to capture the total modernization cost, you have to also add the seismic upgrade, right? Because the amount that you saw for PCY and PCR, those also include the seismic.
Okay.
So we're talking $9 million for the
The
modernization.
overall modernization.
I do
yes.
remember on one of the walkthroughs that there were some questions about the pods and that middle classroom. I'm thinking those have all been taken into consideration based on what the staff teachers gave feedback on.
Yeah, and we really aren't to that place that because we haven't started, design development or schematic design, any of the process with the architects, but we would take into consideration at that point the middle pods, the functionality of the 4 classrooms surrounding a pod, and look to design the modernization in a way that addressed all those needs.
One of the things to see here is the projects that are bracketed in green. Those projects would have to be done at the same time, because at the time we're doing the renovation project, we would have to provide NOM housing since it would take longer than a summer to get done.
And so we asked Harold to bundle anything that would happen in conjunction, and couldn't be like if you decide you want to swap something out from the recommended to the deferred, you have to sort of move that in a bundle.
Is now a good time to talk about air conditioning?
Yes.
Okay. I guess my concern about the air conditioning thing, and I get it totally about eventually we're going to have to change the refrigerant. In an ideal world, you would not replace your air conditioning equipment until the end of its life cycle. So that if the end of the life cycle is not where we are on some of the equipment, we're doing it in a way wasting, or it's inefficient to do it ahead of time because there's still life cycle ahead of time. I understand that eventually we'll have to replace it, but is it possible for us to defer that a little bit so we get more years of life out of it, so that we replace it closer to the end of its expected life cycle?
So for this project, one could say you have till about 2030, or 2028, 29 to actually do the switch over. I would say 80% of the equipment has already passed their useful life or economic life.
At LCU.
At all of the sites.
Oh.
So that equipment is already, past their life expectancy. So technically, you're not right now. You're kind of on borrowed time. So.
And I guess the thinking is that as long as it's working, there's no real advantage to us for replacing it early. Eventually, we will have to replace it, but there's no advantage of replacing it early, because if we replace it early, the new replacement equipment's going to run out that many years earlier. So if we do it now 8 years earlier than we would have to, the new equipment will also be 8 years earlier. So we lose 8 years of life. And I guess that's my concern about all the HV is if we could time it so that we push it off as long as possible. That seems like the most efficient way to do it, but I have a feeling I'm missing something.
But
Because
He said that they're past their due date of being switched out already. So it's going to cost us more if we don't do it right now. And one of them breaks down, then we have to fix that. I mean, then we're piecemealing it versus trying to get all of them since they're already past their due date. Why are we waiting? There's no reason to.
I think to me, the bigger issue.
There's one thing that I do want to point out. So this is really prioritizing the remaining funds. We don't have all of the funding right now to do all of these projects. As you know, we're receiving the bond money in chunks, right? So what we're looking to do is for some of these projects, the one on the higher priority, if the board approved this recommended list, we would look to move some of them earlier in the timeline and start planning for those projects, but it doesn't mean necessarily we would immediately replace all of the HVAC equipment. In this case, I would be working with Barbara very closely to see, well, which one really have to be replaced right now. What we know is by the time we get to 2030, you need to, consider replacing them because you'll have difficulties maintaining them.
Yeah, your point's well taken. Thank you. And yours is too, Caroline. It just always, I don't know. I'm one of those people who drives my car until it stops running. It's like, I don't want to get rid of something that's working. And so I kind of feel the same thing about the HVAC is if we can push it out as long as possible. But I think your answer is exactly that we are pushing out as long as possible because we're not talking about doing it tomorrow. We're talking about putting it on the list so that it gets done somewhere down the road. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we had a super busy maintenance team opening the school year with the heat waves and the air conditioning units. So we probably could run the numbers for you on how many tickets they had open and how many repairs they had to do just to start school.
Yeah, and I think air conditioning is critical. I mean, we need air conditioning and
Are
we need
there
efficient air conditioning.
Are there efficiency savings with the upgrades? I mean, are we looking at any year-over-year cost decrease once we upgrade the air conditioning, or is it a wash?
Well, you would, the units that we would put in would be definitely much more energy efficient than what you have now. So you should see a corresponding saving in your utility bill.
But it's a minimal. I mean, we're not talking significant.
I don't think it's, you're not going to go from paying $100,000 to paying $50,000. It's just not that level.
Okay.
Okay, so for LCE, the only other project that we haven't talked about is the site utility improvement. So for each of the elementary school site, the scope of those projects had significant utilities work, and part of it is because you have very aging site, so the utilities accordingly are also old. The LCE is not as bad as PCR was, but as the years go by, of course, the utilities get that much older, and the site will be over 50 years old. So it's a need that you have to contend with. You talked about, you don't fix it until it breaks, and that is a philosophy that some facilities managers have adapted. If you don't have the funding, that's what you do. But that's not necessarily the best way to plan for your facilities. So in this case, we know the utilities are old and at some point they need to be replaced. So we felt that that project should be part of the list, and you could do that as part of the renovation project.
And I think the idea of like driving my car until it stops running, if it stops running, it inconveniences me and I'm the one that has to walk or take, some other transportation.
Yes.
But these other things like utilities and HVAC and stuff, if it fails, it doesn't just affect us here, it affects
Yes.
all the kids that are in the classrooms. And so I think that's why I see it a little bit different. I don't think we can just keep it going as long as possible. I think we do have to make sure that we replace it in such a way that we can be relatively certain that we have the facilities are usable by the kids and the teachers all the time.
There's an Orange County school that was wrestling with this, that a bunch of their units failed and they couldn't get the parts fast enough. The kids suffered through the just an amazing heat wave, and they pointed right back at the district and the board. Why didn't you plan ahead for this? Why did we get to this point where we waited and now it failed across several units, and they were trying to portable units and it just wasn't working, and that people were up in arms. So let's try to avoid that if we can.
Yeah. So this is really one of the main reasons why staff felt that we needed to do this. So we look at the overall facility master plan and said some of these items were not included in the facility master plan, and we are seeing the result of it right now. So we met and had several discussions, and hence we're coming to you and said, some of these items we can't defer. If you're deferring them, you're taking a risk that a major failure could cause you not to be able to operate your schools. And we're seeing that the area that's probably the most significant is probably at the high school because you have a lot of underground utilities there, and it's a very old school.
Is there any drawback or upside with site utilities improvement to do that in conjunction with the actual construction of a new building? Is it, would we, if we did this improvement and then we did a new building with a separate bond later, is that, are we going to be undoing what we were doing?
So one of the things we would look at is when we look at, say, let's just take LCE. As we decide that we would do these projects, we would develop a facility, a site master plan, or update the site master plan, and then start looking how we would execute those projects so that we don't throw away money. Essentially, if we're going to have a new building in the future, when we're doing the utilities, we would provide a stub out so that new building can be connected to the utilities, so you don't have to undo some of the work that you've already done. And for instance, at PCY, some of the utilities were replaced in the past, but we also have to provide new utilities. We have to also move some utilities. So we are doing that in conjunction with the overall project. And we did the same thing at PCR. Okay, any other question on LCE?
We didn't talk the parking lot improvement. What's inside that 1.4? We've already did the land. Is that demo of the house? Is it a cleanup of the house, design, and all the above?
This is essentially, yes, demolish the existing house and then develop a new parking lot that encompasses the existing lot and the new lot. So essentially, you're just growing expand the parking lot, the existing parking lot. So that is really the goal of this. $1.4 million doesn't really get you very far. But the idea is to try to design it to make it as efficient as possible, get it built as efficient as possible, so we could do it within this $1.4 million. So.
And how many spaces are we talking about?
At this point, like I said, we haven't yet developed a layout for that parking lot. But if the board was to say, yes, this is one of the projects we would like to do, then we would spend some money to actually develop a site plan that show what that parking lot could look like.
The other thing to remember is just cash flow. There's all of these projects that we're recommending are within the life and the scope of this bond. But when we go out for the next $30 million issuance this week, those monies are all, targeted for PCY. And so, we want to build the parking lot, but there's been, no design development, no schematic design, nothing like that. So a lot of this is premature, but we're just earmarking future funds for these projects and identifying them as priorities that must come in or that we'd like to see come in under this current bond.
Yeah, and I was going to say to Joe, to your point earlier, when you're asking, is there a way to rank these? I think we're saying all of these are important on this list. It would be hard to choose among them, but what we do next is then do the time sequence. That's when we would decide. So of what's on the recommended list, this is what we were saying is most important right now with this bond. And then if this gets approved or whatever changes you make, we adjust, then we would look at the timing and the sequence and then do that higher level ranking.
Can we talk about the parking at LCE just for a minute? Because I'm not an LCE parent. Is this a real pressure point? Like, will this resolve an issue? I mean, I would imagine it does, because there's not a ton of parking around there, but what are we seeing currently and what do we think this resolves?
It's a fairly limited lot. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of street parking in front of the houses, and the neighbors would prefer that their houses weren't the whole street wasn't blocked by cars that work for us. So I
Well,
think
there's a
we need-
45-minute period in the morning and a 45-minute period in the afternoon. That's very difficult, as with all elementary schools and the high school as well. There is very limited parking, but I think what's also important is that that parking lot that we have, which is very narrow at LCE and limited in number, also is utilized by the community for Memorial Park, any events that go on in the community. So any expansion we do, we're going to see the usage of it, because you have that back entrance to the Memorial Park by the restrooms. So community members park there all the time for music in the park, any other events that are going on as well.
The only reason I ask is just because that house does continue to generate income, and versus every other choice here that it does lop off income, and that none of the other choices do. So I'm just, I mean, we're going to be faced with a bunch of hard choices. I just want to.
But this is down the road anyway,
Yeah.
right? We're talking at least 5 years, 4 years.
We're probably talking 3 to 5 years.
It would be, yeah, minimum, but yes.
And that's a good point that Josh raises. I mean, you may look at, what can we do with 1.4, 84, and is there an item on the unfunded list that you would prefer to swap out? Because you might say that, if this house is going to generate a monthly, income for the district, and so it may be, but you have to then also balance, what are you going to give to LCE when we went out to the voters and in anticipation of the original facility master plan, and essentially said we would take care of all of the LCE needs. And now half of those needs have been deferred. And so, with trying to prioritize parity, that takes, that you have to sort of weigh all of that.
Right. Especially when you look, in the only smallish size thing would be an upgrade to the admin building. And then it's like, well, how do you weigh the upgrade to the admin building to the upgrade to the parking? And I think from a community perspective, the upgrade to parking would be a
Highly valued.
higher.
But if you get in trouble at the end, right, this could be the long tail of the projects that we do and commit to. And then that could be the one that, or two, that you decide, here's where we go if we get in trouble and there's an overrun or unexpected problem. This could still generate revenue. It's an asset still paying for itself, and servicing thing, and move it down. So there's a couple ways to use it. It could be a plug, but the anticipation is you go for it to get the parity you're looking for.
Okay, I hate to throw some cold water on this. Because the house was purchased with bond money, you can't hold on to
Yeah,
it
you
for
can't.
indefinitely. It has to be, because it was purchased for a purpose, and that purpose has to satisfy the bond, so it can be for revenue generation. Sorry.
Does that mean it has to be satisfied within this bond,
Well,
or do we have a clock that's ticking that's
We'll
specific?
take a look at it, but I think you probably would need to do it within this bond cycle.
And I'm thinking the families and staff at LCE are not going to want to push anything else off.
Okay, LCE, can we move on to PCR? Okay, PCR, once we've completed the renovation project, there are only 2 items remaining. We do have I think there were 4 projects that we've already committed to do. And this is in line with the LCE. We have HVAC equipment for those buildings that are not being renovated that we will need to replace. And we also, as part of the renovation project, we didn't do a significant amount of landscaping work. And so there's some areas that we have trees that probably need to be cleaned up. And then the front of the campus could use a facelift. So we suggested that the board consider a landscaping improvement project to essentially close up the site until we get back to it again in the future.
When we're talking landscaping, are we still talking about all the landscaping in the back of the new building? or throughout the whole campus?
It would be primarily in front of the school, and then in between the existing classrooms. Some of the slope area, we could clean that up. Some of the trees that are dying, those could go away and new trees planted.
Can we talk about one of the unfunded items, the lunch shelter at Palmcrest? Just where that would be, what we're thinking that is.
So the overall master plan of that site has the library being replaced. And the idea was to build a new admin facility, a new kindergarten building. We moved the existing library because you would absorb the library space into that new building. And then adjacent to the MPR, where the library is currently located, that could be a place for the lunch shelter.
So that would be hard to, we wouldn't be able to do that as a standalone project really without.
You would need to do a library, find enough
Okay.
space to accommodate the library. Any other question on PCR? Okay, moving on, PCY is kind of same as PCR and LCE. We'll have some equipment remaining in the existing buildings that would not be renovated that would need to be replaced also. And then LCHS.
Actually, Harold, excuse
ahead.
me. The HVAC system upgrades for PCR, for example, that's the most current project. And so we're at the 99% level with the HVAC system based on what Dan was saying. Not that I would advocate waiting until the last second, but this would be a very quick, I mean, it's coming up pretty quickly to replace the HVAC system is what I'm hearing based on what I see here. Like in the next year, once the modernization is completed, then we're going to update as opposed to LCE, which was 5 years down
Yeah.
the road.
Yeah, so once the modernization is completed, one of the things that we have to balance out is the cash flow, like Wendy indicated, because we do have the funding is coming in chunk, so we have to move the projects around to accommodate the cash flow. So what I haven't yet done in terms of cash flow is to see where each of these projects would fall in terms of cash flow. We've already cash flow out the significant work we're doing at, of course, PCR, the PCY, but we have yet to cash flow these new prioritized projects.
Okay.
No question. I'll move on to the high school. The lists at the high school do represent a lot of new projects that were not included in the original master plan. And this is really based on our needs assessment at the high school and what we've gotten to know about the high school and the infrastructure there. So the track and field bleachers, that project was identified in the facility master plan. This is for just the home bleachers. The visitor bleachers, those bleachers are relatively new. I don't know what the age is, but compared to the home bleachers, they are. The home bleachers, they don't meet ADA requirement and do represent a level of, I guess, safety issue that should be looked at sooner rather than later.
I think our concern about the bleachers is it seems that we need the current capacity. We need to have that many seats on the home side of the bleachers. So that if we're talking about replacing them with something that has less seating, that seems like a non-starter, that we just, it makes no sense to build something that has fewer seats. So I think that that's kind of the guiding principle on that one, that whatever we're going to do, we've got to make sure we keep the same seating capacity. And from comments that either you made before or someone made before, that this dollar figure is not for the same capacity.
That is correct. This dollar figure would represent fewer seats than what you have now. I think the bleachers you have now has probably about 3,000 capacity. For this, we're looking at maybe 1,500.
And I just don't see how that works. I mean, and with our graduations there and our sporting events there and, you know, homecoming games and a lot of the other things, it strikes me that trying to downsize the bleachers is just sort of a no-go.
Yeah. So previous discussion I had, not with the current administrators, but prior administrators, and the thought was, well, we only need that capacity twice a year. So why build to 3,000 seat capacity? But I think today the thinking is different. And I think there's probably more push today for 3,000 seat capacity bleachers than there were, say, 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think I don't remember seeing any detail on this. Just I've seen it as a line item in the FMP for 5 years at the back end of it. So, but at some point we get to really do some visualization, some scoping of it. So I was kind of with Dan, was first to hear that it was actually proposed to be smaller. A lot of community members' feedback then started to follow that. Because I think we talked about it last time briefly. If you look at what some other of our schools have done, if you go to Monrovia's, they built something too that had a lot of functionality underneath the facility to store things. And we might design something completely different if we started to get into the process. So I'm not even sure what we're getting for the $2 million. I mean, you have a lot of the football parents and soccer parents who'd love to have a better press box with more capability. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of things here that we just haven't blown out yet. So I don't even know what we're getting for the price tag. Right
I just worry if this is the price that we're estimating for 1,500 seats, are we talking about double? And I mean, we don't have $2 million to give. I mean, where does that come from? But I think to your point, Dan, I mean, if you look at the total spending, if you look at $26 million worth of spending, there's at least $13 to $14 million in stuff that no one will see. Upgrade to utilities, upgrade to HVAC, things like that. If we then the things that they do see is that we shrunk down the bleachers, that is just it's not a good, you know, I don't think it's a good way forward. So
well, what I would recommend is if the board agree that these are prioritized, or this is the priority we want to pursue, then we would look to do, I guess, more planning when it comes to the bleachers, because we have to scope out the project, figure out what are the essential element that is, you know, that are desired for that project, and then give you a, you know, this is what it would cost, and then you could pick and choose the essential element you want. So
yeah, I think there could be a good, better, best, and if we say with what we want and moving things around, we're at the good. But then if you involve the parents of some of these programs, they might say, we might want to lean in and help with grants or something, just like in softball, there was grant money that came in to get some of that stuff done. And if we've involved them, they've already been asking could we take control of redesigning the bleachers ourselves? They put up the seats and they've done a lot of things there. So you might, if you pull in more people for a full view of this thing, it's kind of the crown jewel of the sports program. I mean, if the pool is going to be that, geez, that's going to be amazing. But I think this whole complex there, you might have a lot of people want to lean in and help if we can't fund it all ourselves.
Yeah, and
I know, but isn't the process? I mean, I fear that if we don't set aside an adequate amount of money, this process was supposed to be to really determine our priorities and set aside money. And if we only set aside $2 million when we are confident it's going to be more than $2 million, I don't want to rely on our partner. I mean, they are generous. And
We're agreeing that we don't want to downsize. It sounds like that. So I
Yeah.
think we should have a number that's commensurate with keeping what we have. And then maybe there's discussion of what the bells and whistles might be on it. And that's where you're getting into another discussion, but put enough in there to keep something that's commensurate with what we have.
especially if we think it is a safety issue.
Yeah, I mean,
if
I think that's the hard thing is that we're with a very finite amount of dollars and we have a safety issue. So we need to correct that safety issue. We also have an issue where every year we're pouring a substantial amount of money into making the bleachers just barely safe enough. And so what we scoped out here was downsizing with quality. I agree with you. We don't want to downsize, but then you have, okay, the safety costs and then you look at this list and we have spent a significant amount of money on the high school and not touched instruction at all. I mean, and so it's all the trade-offs become extremely complicated and the opportunity costs here are pretty significant. And so I think we can take your direction that you don't want to downsize and what's going to cost to, replace the bleachers at a level that is commensurate with the quality and the program that we want. But it's not probably going to come out of these bond dollars unless we give up something else.
Or we are really successful at our contingency planning, right? We're able to rake some of that in the back end of this to put toward this, right?
But I think that's exactly what we're saying is that it doesn't make sense to plan for half the bleachers. If you're going to do planning for the bleachers, we need to do the whole thing.
Full scope.
And that means what do we get rid of? If your recommendation is to do the bleachers, then there's got to be a recommendation for getting rid of something else. I think we're all on the same page
Yes.
on that. And I guess related to that is, might as well talk about it while we're here now, the bleachers and field house of the softball field. Because I think it's a very similar kind of thing as to why does that make the priority list?
The bleachers on the softball field, they are not up to code. So you have bleachers that exceed the requirement where you could just buy it from Home Depot and place it on the site. Those.
Are you talking about on the side where it's the JV side or what's called the JV side and what's called the varsity?
Side? Those they're more than five risers. You also have a shade structure that was actually built. Not sure if they were DSA.
And what is the field house?
The field house is essentially looking at maybe replacing the existing portable with a permanent facility. But again, the scope of the project has to match the amount of money you have. The urgent requirement or the more, I would say, urgent need is really replacing the bleachers. So as you replace the bleachers, what other improvement can you make in that area? And then you look at the other side of the field. What improvement should we make in that area too?
Is the field house, sorry, Dan.
I guess I'm still not understanding. Is the field house what we call the snack bar or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
It has restrooms and
Okay.
there's some locker room on the on the outside.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And one of the reasons also to look at that project is to really to achieve some level of parity with the boys team. So.
Well, I mean, I think the boys, the baseball will probably come here and they'll probably be here at some point in the future. They feel that they've been the forgotten group in all of this. New pool, bunch of new basketball stuff's going on, the new softball. The football field was replaced a few years back and the varsity field's in bad shape. So we gotta, if anything, they're going to be the ones that say, wait a minute here. So we just did softball for $400,000. So can you unpack it? Can you break apart the softball bleachers versus the field house? What percentage is just the bleachers?
I don't have that right now, but we could.
That might be an opportunity to.
Yeah.
I do want to just highlight that the projects at the high school are really going to impact a majority of students. So it's not just one group versus another. And I think that we have to be careful to communicate clearly that all students could potentially have access to the South Side campus, whether it's during lunch, break, at the pool during physical education. I mean, I think that that's important is the priority. I remember when we began is whatever we do, it has to impact as the majority, if not all of our students, not just certain groups, because I would not want to see that happening one against the other. That would be not a good way to go.
Yeah, well, the infrastructure projects at the high school would definitely impact everybody.
Right, like the
It's for the whole
cafeteria,
campus.
yeah.
We have the central plant equipment replacement for both building B and the equipment that's in building A. This is two things. One, the equipment is getting old. And then for the chillers, you have the same issue with the R22 being phased out.
And then the perimeter fencing, is that a specific area that we're talking about? Because I know we're not talking about the front of the school.
This is really, if the district desire is to close, if not all of the campus, then this is really the project that look to do that.
Including, but you're
So
just.
that would be the front as well as some areas in the back.
Yeah, and I think that's a discussion we're gonna have to have at some point about what to do about the backside of the campus. Because as it is right now, it's
Still wide open.
wide open. People park everywhere. We're probably creating fire hazards on any given night that place is parked so that fire engines can't get through, as Mr. Axton pointed out one time. I think we probably have to address that at some point and probably have to look at whether there should be fencing on the backside of the campus for security, not only in the daytime, but also for nights and weekends.
Well, I know we've had plenty of discussions about the fencing in the back of the high school, the building and the side, and also behind the field, the bleachers. That's, I mean, the fencing that's above the bleachers, that's bordering the freeway. So I think that those are all discussions. I don't think we've talked about the front at all.
No, I think we're kind of
I don't think
at
we're
a
even
point that
close to front.
once the South Campus project is finished, I think that's probably the time for us to start looking about what other places, what other porous entrances to the campus should we start looking at?
I do think, and it's not none of this is a pleasant conversation, but I do think there's a question is $800,000 enough for perimeter fencing? And if it's not, is it worth spending money to partially seal up a campus that is still open, or would we be better off deferring that money until we had enough money to actually do the job?
I hear what you're saying, Josh, but on several walks that I remember going on, and I know Jamie, you and I counted one day because we walked the whole campus backwards, forwards, and this was maybe 4 years ago. There was 17 areas, including holes and fences that we found. Towards that way back, the field all the way in the back, by that restrooms, even behind there. So I know that I think that there's got to be opportunities for us to do as much as we can. And I know we've talked about the 7-8 entrance, et cetera. So without even touching the front.
And I think it's a bigger conversation because
Yeah.
I know in our discussions with Chameleon Associates, they say even if you don't completely close off the campus, which may not be what we want to do anyway, that reducing the number of entrances that
Yeah.
need to be monitored significantly improves security because it reduces the number of eyes that you have to have on just kind of watching what's going on. And so I think that's probably a reasonable goal, is to just reduce the number of entrances.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I walked the campus a few weeks ago with our security team down there, and it was really impressive to see how coordinated they are. So shout out to Renee and that crew. They have specific locations. They go at different times of the day. They have rotations to check different things. They close gates at certain times to ensure seniors can get on campus and not be late to class if they arrive during second period. They have it really well organized. But we were talking specifically about the back part of campus. So now we're able to close the entrance into 7-8. So that is secure. And then it's that access road. And Dan, to your point, we were waiting for the South Campus Improvement Project to finish to kind of understand traffic flow, what we could do there with a gate to perhaps still let staff in for parking, but have it closed to the public. But my main concern was that there are evacuation routes for kids. So we need to make sure we study how many gates they have to push out through to get to the football field or get to the softball field. And that's what was part of our delay, is we needed to understand the traffic and in an emergency, how to get to the most open space on campus. And right now they have to go through one locked gate to get to the football football field. So they can push out of the campus, go to the access road, but then somebody with a key has to let them on the football field. I was worried if we put a second gate between the library and the football field, that'd be 2 locked gates for kids to get through. So that's what we were trying to study. So I think to your point, it's going to take a little bit of time to figure that out and make the right decision and not put something in that we don't understand the intended consequences of.
And I think for that, we need to have a line item budget in there for perimeter fencing. What exactly it ends up
Mhm.
looking like, it seems like we're gonna have to look at that after the South Campus project's done, but it seems like we're going to need to do something with that relatively soon.
And it is nice having, the gates at the senior back lot can be closed by the performing arts, the theater that can be closed, the band room can close. I mean, it's pretty nice that it has gotten down to just a couple openings that we can monitor with cameras and things like that and with personnel. So I think, the continued push to start to narrow those openings is great. And then making the decision on how far you want to go after that.
As part of the South Campus improvement project, we are adding a fencing gate between the North Gym and the Old Pool location, and also between the South Gym and the new basketball court. So
I think I'd like to just see at some point a separate review on this, because we were early on, we had several board discussions on all the layouts of all the fencing and all the standards and the layout, and it was an iterative process. And so now everybody's moving, which is great, but we haven't reconciled it back so we all have the same picture. So I was great to see a line item, but I was like, well, what is that? We haven't really talked about it recently.
Yeah.
So maybe separate from that, where are we, and strategy wise, where do we want to go? And maybe that'll inform, how much we need to do here. But I think we're all kind of out of sync in terms of what the thinking is, the latest thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we have those earlier drawings where the architect did have the full perimeter fencing in, and we picked places to start now. So that would be the next step, is to look at the new spots.
So just because I think we've sort of hit every item, at least that in discussion, my takeaway from what we've talked about so far is that every item on this list is essential, and we've underfunded the bleachers. So that's where I feel like we're at. So that's not a great place to be at, because we need to come up. I mean, if we were like every item is essential and this looks great, thumbs up, then great. But what we're actually saying is we're short money to do just even what you've listed, most likely. So the question is, I guess, what do you do now? I don't know.
Well, I think the first thing we
I
do
might
is
be
look
able
at
to
the
help with
bleachers.
that. Okay. So we didn't allocate all of the $35 million. So we
Yeah.
only allocated 26 million. So we still have a little bit of cushion there, even if some of the scope increase, but we still have to account for escalation. We also have not included any funding that we would potentially receive from the state as part of the school facilities program. The reason we didn't include that as part of the cash flow is because there's some level of uncertainty as to when we would receive the funding, because the state essentially has to go for another bond measure before that funding become available. But we have submitted, say, for instance, a project to the state for funding. We've submitted the Palm Quest project, and we are anticipating, I think it's $2.5 million from the state for that project. I think mine.
And I think we also need to be clear that we're not saying there's not enough money to get all these things done. I think what we're saying is we want to look at each of them and see, does this make sense to do now or do some point in the future? I think that's just so there's not misunderstandings in the community that we're not out of money and bankrupt. We're actually at a place where we're now trying to decide the best way to spend the remaining funds on the bond. And things like the track and field bleachers, maybe it is a good thing to come back and say, hey, look, this is what it would really cost to do something in the same capacity, and sort of adjust other things. And I think that's sort of my takeaway from where we're going on it tonight, is that I think you guys have brought us up to speed as to why all these things are necessary and why they're all high priority kind of items. But I think we've asked a few questions that might be nice to come back and revisit a couple of those.
If I may ask though, we still have unfunded facility project at LCHS, for example, all the HVAC systems. I know we keep going back to HVAC, but am I hearing that that's a priority, but it's still an unfunded item?
The, are you looking at the unfunded list?
The air, yeah, the
Yes.
air,
Yes.
the
So-
air handling equipment repairs, I think.
Yeah,
Right. So at the high school, you have you have central plant, and the central plant essentially has two type of equipment. You have the chillers and the cooling tower, which is on the water side, and then you have the air handling units. The projects that are on the unfunded area would be to do upgrades to the air handling units. And they have, I guess, fewer components in those air handling units, so those can be deferred. You could continue to maintain them and extend their life.
okay, so for example, the funded projects right now, building B, and the unfunded building B, the one that is desperate is one side, and the one that's not so desperate is the other other side that could
Yes,
hang
right.
on for a couple more years.
Yes.
Okay.
I recall a discussion about having to replace air conditioning in the building here, the admin building here, because it was running on the wrong. Is that not true? Are we okay in terms of overall air conditioners? I know you went around and did a survey. Do we have any air conditioners we haven't accounted for across the district at this point with this list?
Yes, this site and the lease sites.
So this site.
This site, yes.
And the other thing I think that it's important to remember is that when we did the facility master plan in 2017, and then we went out for the bond, we were very clear that we were not going for a bond that could fund, all of the identified needs. And so I think we've done a really good job at managing all the projects, have good conversation about prioritizing remaining projects. But when you take a look at the unfunded list, it's not a surprise. All these items were identified, back in 2017. They continue to remain priorities, but we never anticipated that they would be covered under the, the bond measure that we're currently dealing with. And so I think it's important to, as you look at that list, you could make a case to put all of those items, in priority status in red ink. And so it's just painting a picture of, aging facilities and ongoing needs and making hard decisions about what we address now and then what we plan to address, with a potential future bond, with our deferred maintenance dollars, with all of the ongoing resources that we can garner.
But I do have a question, and I hear what you're saying, Wendy and Harold, but we have absolutely nothing on here about classroom improvements at the high school. I mean, that's our.
The very last $7 million on the unfunded projects.
Yeah.
But to be fair, those were the most recently renovated items in our district, right under our last bond program. So we have a lot of high school classrooms that were renovated, and so.
And that was in
Yeah.
2006-07.
Yeah. So while we do want to make sure we touch everything. Those have had renovations this century.
Spending time in classrooms, the
Yeah.
majority of my day,
Yeah.
it's so important, as you were saying, to really begin to look at what are some of, especially with the technological needs that we have and the usage. What are we doing to make sure those classrooms are up to speed technologically, that there's ease of use for the teachers, so that there aren't any more plugs and wires and.
Yeah, I think there's 2 classrooms I got a request to install projectors in, and those are our art classrooms. So that was very exciting that they would like some technology. But almost every classroom in there has a ceiling mounted projector and has had that for 15 years. So we just replace them as they break. So the wiring seems pretty solid. We've done some small projects, switching out VGA to HDMI. So upping the technology there with just new cables. So we've been able to make it work. But I think, of course, the teachers would enjoy some new things there as well. But we're in fairly good shape in those classrooms.
And it's
Yeah.
also important to remember that all of the things that we didn't know were going to become priorities, there's going to be a whole new set of unidentified priorities that surface between the priority list and the unfunded list. And then the fine print here is that all of the amounts on the unfunded list are in $2022. And we're going to continue to see escalation. And so it's just to sort of be very practical and very, forthcoming in the level of need. There will be unfunded, unidentified priorities that emerge, and we're going to deal with escalation and contingency on both the priority projects that are within the scope of this bond and on all of the unfunded projects that were identified in 2017.
And I think to that point about classroom space at the high school, I think the project that's identified as the shop project, I don't think we're talking about putting back wood shop. That's probably not likely, but I think that the idea there would be to build out some sort of classroom that could have multiple uses, everything from robotics to technology to computer classes. And I think that is where there's probably the most need for classroom space at the high school. So I know that's also on the unfunded list, but it's also one of those things that I think is a pretty high priority.
And that's where we've had some support through the foundation. The old wood shop is now the robotics lab, and LCFEF helped fund that and got new equipment in. And we've had some parents recently working on renovations in there and making it a really dynamic space. So some of the old wood shop equipment is still in use for the kids, but now they've upgraded to CNC machines and 3D printers and all kinds of interesting things.
That was the tour you and I took, I think, a couple of months ago, maybe about 8 months ago.
And
Is
the
that
old
space.
electrical shop is now a green screen room for LCTV. So there's been some interesting upgrades in there.
But I'm also looking at all of our classrooms too. Yeah.
I want to point out that on the committed project list for the high school, we do have a line item for technology improvement.
Thank you
This
for
is
that,
on the
Harold.
committed. Yes. We figured that we would be doing a lot of improvement in the classroom technology.
Because we've already made technology infrastructure is in good shape, right? We redid the wiring, we did all of that.
Yeah, the
wireless
wiring
network.
is all brand new in the 7-8 building. We were able to use E-rate dollars and get 40% off of that project. So we have some ways that we try to get funding for those projects. And there isn't a super high need for replacement in A and B building of all brand new wires, because it's the distance that the data is running doesn't exceed anything that would require anything to be brand new. And we have run all new fiber between buildings. So we've already taken care of that, that's probably the most important. So we can get high speed to each building, and all the switch gear has been upgraded.
So you're saying that 1.3 could be reallocated to bleachers?
Classrooms, as Kaiser was saying, would be the hope.
Classrooms.
Sorry, technology. I think the discussion tonight's been very helpful. I found it to be very useful to kind of understand a little bit more about what each of these projects is and why we need to do them and why they're a priority. So I think this is a very useful exercise. It seems to me it would be good for us to continue the exercise another time and then start making some decisions. But my perspective is that you guys are on the right track, that we're going the right way in terms of prioritizing things. But I think we've had a few questions that come up tonight that might be nice to kind of get a little more information on, because I sort of still feel like we're talking about kind of long-term things. So I'm not sure it's so urgent that we need to move on any of them.
So would direction be to answer the questions and then bring it back one more time for you to take action on a reprioritized list?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. What decision do you want from us? Because I think conceptually, we're probably 90% there in terms of how the exercise you've gone through and the utilities and what's urgent. All the conversations have been very helpful, but there's a bucket of stuff at the end that we have to really try to zero in on. So if you need decisions on certain things that says, hey, can we go on our strategy around utilities and we prioritize that correctly, and HVAC systems, can we give you those? Yes. And then we go through another iteration to clean up the rest. Because I don't think we're going to say no to the HVACs and all the utility stuff, the infrastructure stuff that you made such a good case for. So what decision do you need from us in terms of the short term?
Harold, would it be action? Would you want the board to take action on the committed projects? So that, because those will be in the most sort of the next iteration of funding and planning. And we could finalize the recommended list and take action on that. And then the next step would be to work with our financial advisors to look at market conditions and, say, okay, we would anticipate the best conditions for a future bond at this point, so that we would at least have some, lane for addressing at some point in the future the unfunded facilities.
The area that at the high school, I think is kind of, we may want to look at that sooner rather than later, the utilities. Just kind of give you an update. We have the boilers that we are replacing, and we're having difficulties filling the lines with water because the water just going somewhere. And that's because there are leaks underground. On, I think it was last Friday, we fill the lines to the 60 pound of operating pressure. We came back on Monday, we were down to 10 pounds. So we know it's going somewhere. So that's an area that I don't know if we could defer it too long. I think we have to start thinking about when and how we're going to be replacing some of that utilities, because it's getting to the point where you're taking risk that something will fail. And
So are you
continue
talking
to
about,
operate.
Harold, you're talking about the $2 million on the unrecommended side?
I think so, yes.
Or actually, would it be, the sort of what's in the box on the top line?
Yeah, what's in the box? The other area that's also another area of that we should look at are the central plant equipment.
In building B and E?
Building B and building E. Now, the biggest constraint we have is really funding. We can't fund all of it right now, but if we could find ways through the priorities to at least fund the utility replacement, maybe we could look to do that.
So my concern is I'm concerned about water going somewhere else. That's not, that's an issue. I can't wait.
It's most likely it's percolating down into the ground. So, but it's not going into any of the buildings.
Well,
We're
then
replenishing the aquifers.
Aquifers, yeah, we
Thank
finished
you.
so
it.
back to kind of what I said, why don't you come back with the numbers that you want to promote right away over to the committed, right? And say, let's go through, and there's 6, there's 8, those that we want to move over right now. And if you need a decision from us today or at the next meeting, so be it. And then we continue to go through the next iteration. Are we ready in that next tranche of still desired and unallocated funds? And then we continue to work it, but let's get the urgent ones over so you can start to go after it and plan for it and sequence it. And if we get in real trouble, wasn't Mark telling us before that we can also, if we have a cash flow hiccup, that we're able to smooth that over with some borrowing mechanisms too, or is there ways that we get in real trouble?
With bond issues, you can't really borrow as much, but there is some stuff that we could push out. So there is, we could fund it through deferred maintenance or some other issue. And so like if you mention on the unfunded one or the deferred, there's 7 million for the high school classroom buildings is from deferred maintenance. So we could move, it's the shell game, as Wendy said in the past. So we can move stuff around all the chairs on the deck too.
But looking at the recommended, the only things we really are uncomfortable with is the track and field bleachers, the bleachers and field house at the softball field, and the perimeter fencing.
I mean, those are what I've marked as you want us to unpack.
Yeah,
And
everything else
provide more
there,
detail on.
We're okay with moving it on over.
I was even happy. One of the key decisions it seems like we're on the same page around is the LCE strategy, because I think that was a big one that we just kind of went by, but ultimately decided not to do the ability and then make to modernization really help settle down some assumptions. So maybe it is down to 4 or 5 things.
I do think though, Joe, your point about partners that are willing to come forward, I think that that's potentially a conversation we can begin to have to give us some sort of idea. We have such supportive families and partners that work with us. So I think that would be great to be able to look at as well.
And I also think that like the track and field bleachers,
Sorry.
we really don't know if it's 5 million or 10 million or, I think that's going to be a major question.
Well,
I mean, that's what you invest in is a little bit to say, go out and do some feasibility or some planning and rendering on that. Spend a little time to just try to help us conceptualize where we are. And then does this have to come to a halt because it is 5 million, or not a halt, but a reshuffling of things?
I think the question I have, I guess, is that this process is really to say that these things on this list in red are more important than the things on the next page, which I think from the discussion today, I feel comfortable that is the truth. Like that I agree with the assessment of the group that sort of did this work, because everything that we sort of identified, I don't know that I would exchange it for anything that's on the unfunded list. So my question is, because we're not immediately allocating these things to go into action. What we're saying is these are the priorities. And I feel comfortable saying that I agree, these are the priorities. And so I wonder if we're not committing funds to it today. Do we need to come back, or do we say like, look, obviously you're going to have to come back to talk about what these bleachers really are, what this perimeter fence really is. We don't know, but certainly it's more of a priority than, the North Gym improvement right now, or, something else. And that is for a number of reasons. It's for both because it's a financial puzzle and some things are way too expensive for us to even consider. And also there's the parity issue, and also there's other issues. So for me, I do feel comfortable with the assessment of what the priorities are. And I would be willing to sort of, if that's the direction, is to say your priorities we agree with your priorities. I feel comfortable agreeing with that at this point. What that ultimately looks like, I don't know.
Because the action item for tonight is, it's recommended that the governing board take action to approve the changes to the current projects in planning and design. So you would be taking action to, approve the general plan and giving direction for more detail at a later date.
And I think I agree with you, Josh. I think the one thing that to me could change is if you knew that the bleachers were 20 million, that then I would feel like classroom space is more important. And I mean, I think so that would sort of, in my mind, it's going to depend a lot on how expensive that is.
Right. Well, but ultimately, if the bleachers were 20 million, then we still only have 2 million to spend because we only allocated 2 million. So certainly, yeah, you could go back into this list and pull a $2 million thing, but you're not going to pull a $20 million thing because you're not trading so I mean, I'm not sure, because this doesn't feel like anything set in stone. We could always grab something from one of these lists and put it in if we find that, for instance, the bleachers aren't not a possible project. So I guess I'm not sure.
So we do have the action with the direction for clarity on some of the sub items.
If at the very least to give you the latitude to start investigating this stuff in a way, I don't want to commit money to a bleacher study if we're, and then to decide that the bleachers aren't a priority. Clearly they are a priority because of safety compared to the other items on the list. So I would support further study on that, just like I would support further study on the perimeter fencing. So anyway,
I think what you're saying is that it's a priority. It's important for us to tell you to go forward with fixing the utilities. And I think we all agree with that. So I don't know if we want to go beyond that. I mean, clearly that's what we want to.
I still have some questions on the blue list and what's in there exactly, and want to interrogate that a little bit, but I don't think we need to do that tonight. But I mean, I'm back to where if there's 75-80% of it that we can move over and do another round, I'm not comfortable 100% saying everything in the blue is out.
I do think we need to do another meeting. I do think that there's an opportunity for further detailed discussion with some of the sub items or some of the items that we asked for some clarity on, plus some of the items in the uncommitted.
I mean, there's seismic in here. I don't know what was in the original baseball softball scope. Maybe the softball's covered now. Well, what's really in there? There's a few big chunks in here that I'd just like to spend some more time on.
I keep going back to classroom buildings.
Classrooms, seismic.
And I think the seismic upgrades, they're being integrated into some of the building upgrades.
That's
So I
part of
think,
the modernization.
right, that
Yes.
I'm understanding. So yeah, I do think we need some clarity.
The other
So-
thing, I mean, I think it's important for us to provide you with clarity, but I also just want to recognize that we're a small staff, that we have only money to cover pretty much the items under committed. And so what we would bring, I mean, and I know that you want more detail, but there's, the cash flow is a definite reality that we have to be sensitive to. And I think the priorities that are identified some of them will emerge to need immediate attention. Others can be deferred and studied. But it's also, I mean, we have 2 meetings in the course of the next week on PCY, and we're pushing as hard as we can on the pool. And so, I mean, I think that there's a lot of competing needs and limited staff time on all of this. And so if we could take some action to approve at least central plant on BE and utilities replacement as a priority, then at least Harold has the capacity to deal with emergencies. We have the list of things that you want more detail on. And we understand that conceptually you're giving direction that you're embracing, at least in concept, the staff's recommendation.
You know,
I
one
think that
thing
sounds like a good way to go. I think though, just before we do that, there's 2 public comments that were submitted online. I don't know if you guys had a chance, 3 now, so refresh your
Okay.
screen. And I think we should give Mr. Haxton an opportunity because we took his public comments first so that we could accommodate it. I know the public comments online 2 of them are questions. I think you, Harold, addressed a lot of those already. But Mr. Haxton, go ahead.
David Haxton, district resident. I came up with 6 priorities: safety, infrastructure, and these are in order: safety, infrastructure, improvement, learning environment, community relations, athletics, and new buildings. And so first, I would go with safety, and that means I would like to see the drop off at PCR because that is for student safety. If the bleachers are a safety issue at the high school, whether softball or football, either way, any bleachers, any safety issues, I think that's highest priority. And the fencing at the high school, I think is a high priority. And I think the cost of the fencing is probably more than what's there because you also need controls. That the fencing that's been built doesn't have any kind of controls. There's no conduit going to it or anything. And unlike at the elementary schools where the kids don't go and leave the campus, at the high school you're going to have a lot of people just leaving in the middle of the day for whatever reason. And if you're not going to have cameras on it, or you need some controls, you need to know if there's a gate open or whatever. So and when you did the wireless controls on the classroom doors at the high school, that was $1 million. So if you're going to have 15 gates or whatever at the high school, it's going to be costly. The second is infrastructure. And that means heating, cooling systems at the high school. It means the HVAC systems at the other schools, seismic improvements. I know that's not safety, but it's a good long-term investment. And then technology, technology is so important and we've already invested a lot, but that's a higher priority. My third priority is improve the learning environment, which basically is classroom modernization and do all that stuff to put in the overhead projectors and amplifiers or whatever is good. Fourth priority, community relations, and that's where get the parking off the streets, and that's both at LCE and PCY. You have those issues, and I think that's a pretty high priority. And I have athletics pretty low. Basically that's not the essential function what you're doing. It's not safety, it's not infrastructure, it's not the learning environment. And there, all the field improvements, the field houses, to me, those are relatively low. You also have opportunities in the future bond for, selling that bond with that. You have all the community groups that will contribute. You don't get a lot of contributions for hooking up to sewers, but you get contributions for, improving the softball field or whatever. And finally, new buildings to me, I'm not talking about the ones you've already committed, but new building at LCE, or the north buildings at PCY are pretty low priority. And something like the Career Technology Center, you could have grants possible to do things. So I wouldn't like put the bond money in right away until you've explored grant possibilities. And finally, as far as generally construction, I'm not real big with kind of multiple phases of construction. Like you're at PCR, it's been very disruptive. You're using the upper playground or upper parking lot for staging. If you go and put it to parking, and then in 3 years you come back to do the administration building, the kindergarten building, that's really disruptive. It makes more sense to do it all now while you've got the staging area in use and stuff. So to me, it's sort of like, finish PCR or that's it. If you haven't done administration building, that's not in this bond. It's just, it may not ever happen. And the same at PCY. I don't see how you can do, phases there. If you do the west buildings, and then later you're going to come in and do the north buildings, which are, not center of campus, but you got to go through the campus to get there. I think that's going to be super disruptive. So, there again, can you really get everything done at once? And, as I said before, with the library, I don't see you coming in 5 years or 10 years and just doing the library in the middle of campus. So with the construction phasing, I would try to get everything done at one place and then move out. I think people understand that you can only do one school at a time. And, you chose years ago, LCE would be last. And, you do the modernization, but any new building is a new bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haxton. The 2 public comments or 3 public comments submitted online have to do with the timing of the projects and the cost numbers. And I think you already addressed that most of these projects are in 2022 dollars. Is that?
Harold, I'm sorry. Can I send you to the microphone, pretty please?
Yes, most of the projects on the unfunded list are $2022. Yes.
And then the other question has to do with the timing of the start date of the committed projects. And I think what you've answered on that is it'll depend a lot on bond funding and flow. So I don't know that you have committed dates for any of those projects, do you?
Yes. So what we have done is we put together a cash flow based on when we anticipate revenues to come, and we slate those projects, based on what we're going to have in terms of funding.
So I think we're probably ready for a motion. Is your suggestion to just cover those few items, or go the other way and strike the couple of items that we're not real comfortable with? It sounds like we're still kind of back and forth on bleachers and field houses and things. What would you prefer?
Well, I think there's sort of 3 ways to go, and you could pick between the 3. You could take action to approve the priorities as presented and requesting more information on those identified projects. You could say that you'll take action to approve the committed project priorities and the central plant BE and utilities replacement at the high school, so that sort of the immediate priorities and the sort of in progress priorities are all addressed, and then give direction to come back with a finalized, with more data on the recommended measures and anything else that you've requested. So it's in its entirety, it's in specific, or you could just, wait, have us come back and present the final scope and approve the whole thing. Mhm.
Yeah, I think we should do something to address at least the utilities tonight, because I think that's the option 2 sounds to me like a reasonable way to go.
So you're saying the committed, we can sign off on that, and then your high ones you just mentioned. And then we go to the next iteration.
And then staff has real clear direction on what you would like detailed in order to approve some version of the recommended future or recommended priorities within this bond.
Is that, you want to make the motion along that lines, Jeff?
So I make the motion that we approve the committed as presented along with, can you repeat that, Wendy? The
Central plant replacement,
B and C.
E and E, and then utilities replacement at the high school, water, gas, sewer, chilled water and heating.
So as Wendy represented.
And then you don't have to take action, but just want to iterate that we are very clear on the direction for additional information that you've provided, and we'll get that to you as soon as possible.
Can I ask one question? Does this mean then we would move those to the committed list?
That's my
I
assumption.
think makes sense.
So it's you're committed, and then those move into that bucket as well. And you're going.
That's
So just to repeat, we have a motion that states all committed committed projects at this point, plus at LCHS, the central plant equipment for building B, E, and that whole, the utility replacement. We're not talking about landscaping, or are we putting it together?
That goes together because it's the concrete work and things like that.
Got
It's
it,
not-
okay.
Yes.
And then you'll come back with some additional details at a later date for the bleachers field house and the perimeter fencing. Again, these are safety issues that are imperative. But we're not looking at anything for example, PCR HVAC upgrade, which is moving forward anyway.
I think that those don't require immediate attention, so they would remain on the recommended measure LCF priorities.
Okay,
And then once we gave you further detail on the identified projects, you would then feel comfortable to approve that list in its entirety.
okay, thank you for the clarity. I can second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous? Nairi, did you get enough detail? Okay, I thought you would. Fortunately, we have the recording too. Well, thank you. We do have a closed session that we're going to move into. So we have the opportunity for the public to address the board on closed session agenda. Do we have anyone that wants to address us on closed session? If not, we will be going into closed session. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Harold.
Harold.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Toby.